Every week, Joy and I get in our truck and we drive to North Carolina. It takes about 2.5 hours. And we have a townhouse down there that we live in and purchased about a year ago so that we can stay there for 3 or 4 days and be with our parents. They're both in assisted living facilities, and my father has no one else there around him. So I go and I stay there for 3 days, sometimes 4 days, so that each day during that period I can be with him and take him out to lunch and take him shopping and doing these other kinds of things that you still need to do, even though you have some restrictions in your life. And on the surface, you think this is going to be an imposition to your lifestyle, that somehow it's going to cramp you and it's going to be a responsibility that once you kind of plug into, that you're not sure whether or not you're going to forever want to do that. One of the things that I have discovered, it has become one of the great joys of my life. And I had no way to anticipate that. I had no way of knowing this would be like one of the most enjoyable things that I would ever do. I couldn't imagine that, but it has truly become one of those kinds of things that is just sheer joy to me. And the reasons are different than you would think. So much of my life, I was not exposed to my father in a way that allowed him to just open up and talk about his life. I left home when I was 16 and went to a boarding school that was about 1,000 miles away. And so from the time that I would have maybe asked questions about those kind of things, I wasn't there. And he started traveling when I was 13, and he traveled literally across the country each and every week. And then eventually he traveled really just globally. So I didn't have a lot of exposure to him in that way. And it has given me the most incredible opportunity for him not to know that he is, to talk about his life in a way that I've never heard, things I never knew, particularly those kinds of things that are not a part of the moment as you're growing up, and that means from his childhood. And the stories that I've heard from his childhood are just incredible. Growing up in Kentucky, rural Kentucky, what we would think of as a part of Kentucky where there wasn't a lot of development, and I was there about 10 years ago, and there's still not a lot of development. What it was like to grow up there, what it was like to grow up with not having an automobile, not having electricity, not having running water, and living in a house that was heated by a Franklin stove and attending a one-room schoolhouse. I had no idea what these things were like. I just sort of heard these anecdotal references to them now and then, but I never walked to school with him. I never walked home with him. I never stood behind a plow that was being pulled by 2 mules. Can you imagine that? I just had no way of imagining those kinds of things until I had this kind of time with my dad. A kind of time where he can open up and talk about things that he remembers that it seemed to him that nobody would be interested in, but I mean, I hang on every single word. He was 9 years old, and in this rural community of Eastview, Kentucky, there was virtually nothing in the way of excitement. There was no drive-in, there was no drugstore. There was this one-room schoolhouse, and there was one of those stores that I guess every community had. That was the post office, it was the center, it was where you purchased things, and that was about it. And then there were churches. But in this town, one summer when he was 9 years old, there all of a sudden was this commotion about a tent meeting that was coming to this community. Now, my father was not, they were not religious people. They were just hardworking, honest people, but they were not religious. They did not go to church or make any kind of spiritual investment in themselves or their children. But my father was excited, you see, about this big tent that was being put up. I mean, just here it is in this field. And they're inviting people to come at nighttime to this revival meeting. Well, it didn't matter if you were religious or not. It was something to be a part of. And my father said that he would walk to this tent meeting, and he said it was exciting. It was so exciting, all of these people. And the floor in there was sawdust, and they had these naked light bulbs hanging up, and they had a PA system. I mean, it was really something. And each night, people would gather in. He said underneath the tent, there would be the women and the children, and the men would sit outside around these, or on the cars. They would sit on the hoods of the cars and kind of talk back and forth. But they didn't come under the tent. And he said this guy named Rupert Goodman would get up and preach. And he said the second night, he said it felt like that he was the only person there as this 9-year-old boy. And he said it was as if Rupert Goodman was preaching straight at him, just straight at him. That he knew him, that he followed him around and saw him. And he said he felt that way. And then he gave this time to respond, to come forward. And he said he was standing there, and all of a sudden, he said he felt a hand on his shoulder, and he looked up, and it was a soldier from Fort Knox, Kentucky. And he said, "Sonny, would you like to go forward?" And my dad shook his head that he would. And the soldier, went with him. And that night, my dad gave his heart to Jesus, and that would change him as a 9-year-old boy for the rest of his entire life. My dad said that night as he was walking home from the tent revival, he said it was like he was walking on air. There was just something about it that had just transformed him inside. And of course, when he gets home, he wants to tell everybody, and they don't really know what it is that he's talking about, but they're not in any way discouraging. They just, they don't understand. But my father has virtually never gone to church. He's never been a part of a church. But he starts, and there is a circuit preacher that comes to their community the first Sunday of the month, and another circuit preacher that comes the third Sunday of the month. And my dad said every time, he said he was there, and if he could find another church that was having church, he would go to that church. He said, any church, any revival meeting, anything to do with that, he said, I would go. And he said, I started reading my Bible every day. Every day, he said, I started reading my Bible. And he said, I started praying, and I would talk to God like he was my new best friend. I would just converse with him. And he said, I had a place out in the woods that I would go and pray and talk to him out loud. See, he'd pray to him that way. At the time he was 9, he continued on, and in school he did well. And when he was 14, he had completed the curriculum that the little one-room schoolhouse had. And my dad said he felt like God was calling him to be a preacher and that he should go to Bible college. Yeah, at 14. But he wasn't sure how you did that. He didn't know exactly where you would go. And so he would continue to communicate with the preacher, Rupert Goodman, and through letters, and he said, you should go to the same one I went to. And he told him where that was. It was Frankfort, Indiana, which was probably about 400 miles from Eastview, Kentucky. But from Eastview, Kentucky to the other side of Indianapolis, Indiana, might as well been 1,000 miles or 10,000 miles. Might as well have an ocean in between, because he said that's just how remote it was for him to think about going to a Bible college that was 400 miles away. And he said that summer, as he would plow behind those mules, he would think about going to Bible college. And he said it finally came August. And And you start the school, you start the college in September, and he still had not made any kind of plans or arrangement except to pray about it. And he told his mom, you know how boys sometimes can have conversations with their mothers about things in their life they can't have with anybody else. And his father was considerably older. He was 14. And I think my grandfather probably would have been about 50, 55 years old at that time. He was a kind man, but a stern man, if you know what I mean. He wasn't somebody that was necessarily easy to talk to. He was pretty serious about life. As a farmer, as a husband, as a father, and all of these things, it was hard. And my grandmother, Polly, said to my dad, well, you need to talk to your father about going to Bible college. He said, well, I don't know. I don't know. She said, you just talk to your dad about going to Bible college. And he said, here they are in August. And he still hasn't said anything. And he said, he kind of one night gets the nod at the table from his mother that this would be a good time to bring it up. And he's sitting down at the other end, and his father's at the other end, eating and not saying anything. I'm not sure why. I guess you didn't talk at the table. But he speaks to his father, and it's kind of like, yes, son, what is it? He said, well, he said, I'm a Christian. He said, yeah. He said, and son, we admire the way that you are. And just, kind of continued on. And he said, well, Dad, he said, I feel like that God has called me to be a preacher. I assume that his dad's just kind of nodding, listening. And he said, in order to do that, he said, I need to go away to Bible college, except he said, I don't have any money to go to Bible college on. And my dad said, for the first time in his life, he saw tears running down his dad's face. And I assume his lips kind of quiver, and he looks up at my dad and he said, son, if you feel like that God is calling you to be a preacher and you want to go to Bible college, he said, if we have to sell every cow on this farm, he said, we'll do it to send you to college. And he said, from that night on, everything was focused on getting my dad to that Bible college. I have right here this, I don't know if you can see this big old brown leather suitcase that my grandmother, Polly, ordered from the Sears and Roebuck catalog for him to go away to college with. You know how moms are. And she said, or he said that she got this suitcase and put clothes and all of these different things. And he said the day drew closer and closer when he would go to Elizabethtown and catch the train to Louisville. And then from Louisville to Indianapolis, and from Indianapolis to Frankfurt. And he said he can remember that day, catching the bus at Eastview, at that store, and riding it to the bus to the train station in Elizabethtown, and then standing on that platform with this suitcase and getting on that train on that day, and starting the rest of his life and the man he would become. Eastview, Kentucky, all the way to Bible college, and then spent the rest of his life preaching the gospel to everybody he encountered, and he still does it. He still does it.